You're listening to episode 69 of the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Rachel Naar about how to eat intuitively when you have food sensitivities and intolerances. So stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm a registered dietitian and coach trained in functional medicine with a passion for helping women just like you ditch perfectionism and use food, fitness, and self-care to fuel your bigger God-given purpose. I believe that it's possible to achieve your biggest life-changing goals without the frustration, obsession, or negative self-talk that so many women subject themselves to every day. All you need are the right tools, the right mindset, and the faith to turn your dreams into reality. I'm here to guide you along the way. The truth is that you are so much more than a body, and I'm on a mission to help you change the way you think and act at a core beliefs level so you can transform your physical, mental, and spiritual health from the inside out. Are you ready to become fed and fearless in your pursuit of a healthy, meaningful life? Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast.
Hey there, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm your host as always, and we have a really interesting episode today about a topic that I used to deal with a lot of when I was working more in the nutrition space, working with nutrition clients and helping them with their health. And that topic is the intersection of intuitive eating with food allergies and intolerances. Now, something that I've noticed in the intuitive eating space, now this is a little bit of a broad brush, so if you're someone who is a dietitian that works in the intuitive eating space, please know I'm not saying that all intuitive eating dietitians are like this, but something that I had been seeing a lot of when I was looking at the content that other practitioners were putting out about intuitive eating, there was this common theme of saying that if you don't have an actual food allergy, like a diagnosed food allergy from a doctor, that you should not be avoiding a food. And unfortunately, I think that that advice is doing more harm than good for people that have food sensitivities. The guest that I have on today is someone who experienced her own significant issue with food sensitivities, specifically histamine intolerance. And so she knows very well that sometimes there really are food issues that you have that are not an allergy, but are creating a very strong reaction that actually make it difficult to enjoy food and to eat in a normal way. So I love that we were able to have this conversation today about combining intuitive eating with issues of food intolerances, digestive symptoms, all of that, because again, it can become very black and white in the online space where we're talking about intuitive eating and saying that, you know, food sensitivities don't exist or whatever kind of things that some dietitians will say. And I do not believe that. And my guest today does not believe that that's accurate either. So on our show today, we have Rachel Naar. Rachel Naar is a decaf-loving Leo with a passion for people, places, running, and Motown music. She received her master's degree in clinical nutrition at New York University and completed her dietetic internship at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. She is the founder of her private practice, Rachel Naar Nutrition, where she helps people reinvent their relationships with food, focusing on stress management with a body-positive, intuitive eating approach. She also assists with gastrointestinal distress and food allergies and intolerances. She aims to demystify food, draw connections to overall well-being, and make life more palatable. Rachel previously worked at Mount Sinai West in New York City, inpatient as a dietitian for the psychiatric unit and neurosurgery unit. Rachel has been featured in Chowhound and Physiologic. So again, Rachel's got a lot of really interesting expertise, interesting perspective on the topic of food sensitivities, food intolerances, and how people with those issues can still practice intuitive eating and start to feel better in their bodies and better around food. So I'm super excited to have her on the show today. And without further ado, here is Rachel Naar. All right, everybody. Well, I am so excited to have with me on the show today, Rachel Naar. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And Just so our audience can get to know you if they don't know you already, if you could just tell us your story, how did you become a nutritionist with a body positive and intuitive eating approach?
Yeah, so I started in theater, believe it or not. I have an undergrad degree from Tisch, so singing, acting, dancing, all that kind of stuff. And I was just noticing, in our training, the focus on the body and how we hold the body, how the body holds tension. And I was very much an English history gal, not a math and science individual. So I was going to act, I was going to audition. And I just found in that space a ton of misinformation about food. We had different teachers telling us one thing about how to eat, how to show up in our bodies. Casting directors would say, lose 20 pounds, gain 20 pounds, pick one. So there was a lot of noise out there about how to show up in your body and how to eat food on your plate. So after auditioning for a bit, and that was a pretty tough world, sort of getting to the last callback and they choose someone else and sort of devastating. I thought to myself, this is not quite the path for me. And I had always loved food and nutrition, and I loved cooking and messing around in the kitchen. And I thought, you know what, let me just pop into a class. Let me just see, this math science thing, this biochem thing. Let me just see if I like it. And I felt a little, Jekyll and Hyde. I was working in sales and marketing at the time, and I was sort of, sales gatherings by day and biochem by night. And it was a little bit sort of wonky, but I kind of loved it. And it really makes sense. And it spoke to me. And I felt really empowered to assist specifically women with sort of all the noise that we hear about diet culture. So I thought, I kind of have two choices here. I can either be a HAES-informed therapist, or I can be a dietitian. There was something about having that nutrition education and educating and teaching through nutrition education to promote behavior change that really spoke to me. So a lot of the clients that I see are artists, are performers, are creatives. That's definitely a huge subset of who I see. And I just noticed in general, while I was sort of going through my training at NYU, that there wasn't a lot of information on this. Like, I hadn't heard the phrase intuitive eating until I left grad school. And, thinking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I only heard this at age 10, 11, 12, when I was, dealing with my own struggles with food, that my gosh, if somebody had said to me intuitive eating, it would have blown my mind. So I'm so excited now to assist my clients who, have the opportunity to learn about this information, and for me to also grow as a clinician and be part of that amazing community that is still growing.
That's so interesting that you started in theater and that was the path that you were going on that kind of led you to the nutrition world. I don't know if I've ever heard of anyone going from theater to nutrition. I actually was looking at Tisch when I was in high school because I thought I wanted to go do set design.
Oh, cool.
And theater design. And then I had visited Carnegie Mellon, which is a really great school for arts and theater and stuff. And I thought that was where I actually wanted to go eventually. And then I visited, and it was a bunch of people doing art in these tiny cubicles up in the attic of this building. And I was maybe that's not what I want. So ended up not doing that. But my roommate in grad school was actually in the theater department at UNC and in the master's program. And I remember she had to always kind of be managing her physique, a lot of the plays that she was in, because she was kind of the ingenue character. And so a lot of times she had to be very specifically managing her weight, her costumes always had to fit. So I can only imagine that in that world, there is a lot of focus on the way that you look, on the way that your body looks, on your weight, all of that. And it's funny that you said that your options are either lose 20 pounds or gain 20 pounds. It's almost having a just average body size is not what anybody wants when you're an actress. So with your food philosophy, did you ever have any interest in kind of more of the traditional clinical stuff with dietetics, or when you got into your program, were you just straight into the, I want to do this intuitive eating approach?
Yeah. So I started my journey as a dietitian inpatient. So I worked at a hospital in New York City, even as recently as this past August, sort of through COVID, all of that. And it was really important for me to cover the psychiatric unit. It's interesting, a lot of dietitians don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And in my interview, said to my manager, I absolutely want to be involved in that. And she was like, great, because nobody else does. And I was like, sorry for them. I am really intrigued by food and mood and how the two of those interplay. And for me also, too, the psychiatric unit was a bit more sort of geared towards outpatient, what I wanted to ultimately do. I could have longer conversations with the patients as opposed to, in the ICU, maybe you're intubated, maybe the family member's there, you're in and out in 5 seconds. So I did spend time inpatient. I covered the psychiatric unit. I covered the neuroscience unit. I covered post-op orthopedic unit, cardiac unit. So definitely kind of delved my hand into clinical for sure. And I liked that. There was a part of me that did enjoy really becoming savvy to blood work, working on a team, going to rounds. Like there was a part of that I really did enjoy. But I knew at the end of the day, it was only going to be so useful. I was, pending ensure orders, and half my day was chasing the doctor around to sign the order because we don't have order writing privileges in New York, which is a whole other podcast. But yeah, I just knew I was going to be sort of more able to do what I wanted to do outpatient and in private practice. And so, for the past 2 years, while I was at my job in the hospital, I started on the side and I had a private practice on the side. And I was 8 to 4 at the hospital, and then I actually happened to live very close to where the hospital was. So I had like a 4:15 session, and then I kind of just back to back myself. It was a tough time to be able to see everybody in the evening. And then ultimately I sort of had the amazing final opportunity to be able to just switch over to fully my own practice. But, I think about, do you have to do clinical? I mean, everyone has sort of their thoughts in terms of their journey of being a dietitian. I think, for me, I'm glad that I did it. I didn't really necessarily think I was going to roll out and do it. I thought maybe I would do perhaps like an IOP for eating disorders, but I had this opportunity and I could cover psych. So I was in.
That's so interesting. I feel like I went straight into my own business when I graduated, and just trying to imagine having that full-time job, working on that, and then growing your business on the side. It seems like that, I'm sure it was a pretty big sacrifice as far as like your time and energy and all of that. So that's great that you were able to move into your private practice. So how has your food philosophy changed over the years?
Wow. I mean, I would say the food philosophy from Rachel when she was auditioning and she was like 13 years old. I mean, you just kind of take diet culture as fact. You just don't know any better. You just assume that what these adults are saying around you, especially as I was auditioning and I had, agents and managers speaking to me, you just kind of assume that they have your best interest in mind. And when people say, oh, I'm looking to lose weight, you just assume, oh, that's in the name of health. So, for a while, and even the beginning of my studies as an RD, I was like, oh, weight loss is preferred, or that's, we have to eat healthy all in the name of health. And this is what's healthy and this is what's not. And it wasn't until I was really introduced to this sense of a health at every size and intuitive eating. And I really bought it for myself. And I understood, oh, this is actually the issue. The issue is diet culture. Then I was able to sort of switch over and understand, oh, this is how I can be helpful to people. So I would say that was the biggest shift. And a lot of that was taught at my grad school really didn't encompass this. So I was really having to find other mentors, other opportunities to be engaged in this. But unfortunately, this really isn't taught in, a DPD program or a grad program. It's really only like a nuanced couple of webinars and maybe a couple of folks along the way that you can connect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to remember I don't know if we talked about it. Honestly, I went to grad school. I started almost 10 years ago. I guess I graduated in the end of 2013, so about 7 years ago. And I feel like because I always was learning so much outside of the program, even during the program, like I was learning about different ways of eating and different approaches to nutrition. And some of those things I don't necessarily agree with anymore. The things that I was learning about, just from the online space and the different philosophies on food. But I was always learning things that were not being taught in school. So now when I try to think back to like, what did I actually learn in school? Like, I actually feel like I don't even remember, which maybe is really terrible. But But it is something where I feel like, and I went to, UNC is a great school as far as nutrition is concerned. Like we actually had a pretty progressive educational program. So all of that to say, I still was doing so much learning on the side and so much, research and reading and everything. And I had a blog during the whole time. So I feel like I don't remember learning a ton about intuitive eating when we were in school, for sure. So it's really interesting how with your private practice, you have more of that focus on intuitive eating and like the relationship with food. But then you also, as far as I remember from your bio, that you also help people with gastrointestinal issues and intolerances and allergies. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I love that space. I personally developed a slew of intolerances. You would think that that's why I became a dietitian, but no, I was pretty much fine prior to sort of right before my dietetic internship, when I sort of went back to school for nutrition and was then, even the past couple of years, and I developed, what's called mast cell activation syndrome, and I have histamine intolerance. And, I was completely really fine. I had a true allergy to cashews, and that was really from childhood. But other than that, I was pretty fine, give or take. And I was really hit with a ton of bricks, from it. It was very confusing. There was no information about it. One day I could eat this one food and the other day I couldn't eat that food. And then it was about sort of the amount of, histamine intolerance can be sort of like a bubbled over cup. So if you have this and this day, that's fine. If you have this and this the other day, then it's not fine. So it was a lot of doctors, a lot of questions. So I just thought, this is an important space because the food, especially intolerance space, is really confusing. I think, a true allergy is a little bit easier to understand, but when it's an intolerance and, the symptoms are not life-threatening and your body's not attacking itself, it's just a different story. And so I was especially interested about how that interlays with sort of your relationship to food or even disordered eating. There was a period of time for me that I was really fearful of tomatoes, not from sort of I think I'm going to gain weight if I eat tomatoes, but it was like an ARFID kind of thing. Like I'm afraid that my throat will get really tensed up and swell because I had sort of one bad pizza eating experience and I didn't necessarily know what component of the pizza that it was, but I kind of just zoned in on tomatoes. So thankfully I can say I can have tomatoes today. So I kind of was able to trial and coax myself up to actually work through that intolerance, which is pretty cool. But there's a lot of fear around food for individuals with food allergies and intolerances. So that's a space that I'm really intrigued by, especially the ARFID space, whether or not it's connected to intolerances or not, or swallowing issues or a choking situation or some other form of trauma. I think, the ARFID world is really fascinating. So I'm definitely intrigued by that space.
And can you define that for the listeners? I think you said ARFID?
Yeah. So avoidant restrictive intake disorder. So that's essentially when you are limiting food, perhaps due to a texture aversion or color aversion, or sometimes it's entire food groups, but you're doing it not because you have any fear of gaining weight or fear of what these foods will do to your body, but because you have a fear around perhaps choking or gagging or the smell. And, this can be related to psychological trauma. I have a client that I work with who had a choking situation when he was 2 years old in a doctor's office. So now there's a fear of doctors. And then there's also sort of a fear about certain foods that call upon that sort of gag reflex for him. So these individuals, what's so interesting, because I work with individuals with disorder eating and eating disorders as well. These individuals are like, oh my gosh, if only I could gain weight. It's sort of a joy to have like your client load be peppered with a couple of these individuals, because they're like, Rachel, I'm so down to gain weight. Like, how can we, like, I want to do this. Like, I'm so afraid of XYZ. Like, let's get in there and do this. And it's totally scary, but like, my gosh, my life would be better if I could be sort of nutritionally adequate. So it's fun too. It's a journey. I've done some virtual meal support in the past couple of months, and that's really fun and sort of clunky and hard to do. And we've tried to figure that out for some of my ARFID patients. But that's sort of what I do with them. Yeah.
So it's really interesting to me when I think about the clients I've worked with in the past, especially with like histamine intolerance. I feel like a lot of times those food sensitivities and intolerances and things that are, like you said, not true allergies. And I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. Sometimes I feel like the health at every size, anti-diet, like all of that space in general can be very like dismissive of things like food sensitivities. And it sounds like you have a different perspective on that, probably a lot to do with your own personal experience. But I do feel like those issues can lead to, I would always call it like orthorexic behavior, where it was like you had to eat a certain way or you were going to have a health problem. And especially with like histamine intolerance, I know there's a lot of guidelines out there, like a low histamine diet is very restrictive. And so it can easily lead to unintentional weight loss and honestly other health issues that can come up from malnutrition. So how do you combine in your work with clients, how do you combine issues like mast cell activation disorder, histamine intolerance, like those things that they're real, right? Like it's not like you're just making up the fact that you're sensitive to something, right? So those food sensitivities are very much real, but these people want to be able to have that unencumbered eating ability. Like they don't want to be afraid of food. They don't want to be worried that if, oh my gosh, if I have a tomato, I'm going to like have a flare or something like that. So how does that combine with intuitive eating? Because I feel like your intersection there is very unusual as far as a practitioner is concerned. And I think it's really cool that you have that intuitive eating approach, but then you also acknowledge that there are situations where people don't feel well when they eat certain things and they do need help with that side of the equation. So I know that was kind of a broad question, but hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, it's complicated and it is interesting. I do find that I'm sort of alone in this space of trying to navigate these two worlds. And I hear what you're saying about sort of the intuitive eating space, sometimes dismissing, real sort of physiological things going on in the body. And I think, that's one of the downfalls of intuitive eating. And I think, there's a couple of things that, that world can for sure expand upon. But I think, first, when I'm working with somebody is to validate their experience. For me, like I was tossed around, I was told, psychosomatic. I was told, let's put you on some Xanax by a doctor. I mean, people were loving to say that this was like so psychiatric, so somatic, so in my head. And I was like, but I'm telling you, like, I'm happy to admit that I could be anxious like the next person, but I'm eating this shrimp. And then 7 minutes later, it feels like my whole world is about to implode inside of my heart. So I'm happy to admit that perhaps some anxiety is playing a role as part of this, but I'm just like, I'm going to tell you that there's something else going on. So I think, as much as we can as practitioners, can we validate their experience? It can be really uncomfortable and lonely to be dealing with this. So I think validating the experience, and I think for sure when I'm working with somebody sort of in this space, can we have the interdisciplinary team? I feel like I'm like the RD that's calling everybody. I'm calling the therapist. I'm calling the doctor. I'm coordinating. I'm sort of like a little mini case manager in that way. And I think there's certainly some of us that do that and other ones who sort of sit back. And for me, I sort of enjoy that. And maybe it's coming from my clinical experience too. Like I like sort of the team dynamic. And then I think also what I'm doing is I'm unpacking food rules. I'm trying to sort of sift through, are these food intolerances? Are they contributing to sort of other food rules? Like what are your reasons for the foods that you like? And if I hear, the reasons why the foods that they like are sort of completely related to sort of the nutrition components of them, then I'm just going to be flagged and just sort of note that. And same with the food that they dislike. This is too high in this, or I'm just going to sort of suss out and assess and just sort of have a listening ear to sort of the reasons why choices are being made. And then I think too, they're coming to me, we're assuming, right, it's different than inpatient where, they're just sort of sitting there and they kind of have to listen to me for 5 minutes so they can tell me to get the hell out, which certainly happened inpatient. One time I had food thrown at me and I was like, okay, I'll see you.
Oh my gosh.
So hopefully virtually that's not happening. No food's being thrown at me, but they're coming because they do want to work on this, right? They do want to explore and they know I'm the dietitian and that's my role. So they probably assume there's going to be some form of sort of meal support or food exposure. And I think, with the intolerance, and it's not life-threatening, of course, sort of we have to do it in a safe way. So sometimes we have like the doctor online and nearby, and we kind of have this hierarchy of lists. And maybe like there's one food, for example, that gives you some hives. And, we're not sure the quantity amount that you can have. And so that feels maybe safer. And maybe that's a little bit more, if you think about like a traffic light, that's the green. So perhaps I had an individual that got itchy with almonds, and we determined it was not a true almond allergy. And we said, okay, 7 almonds kind of feels like an appropriate serving to trial. And that was totally fine. But then we noticed, for her experience, when she had like a concentrated like nut butter, like almond butter, that was a no-go. So it's sort of sussing out those nuances. And again, we're looking for quality of life for these individuals. So it would be so useful for her to be like, oh, as part of my snack, I can have like 7 to 10 almonds, but nut butter is like, doesn't work for me. And then there's an aversion actually to other nut butters. So the individual doesn't want to have sun butter, doesn't want to have sort of granola butter. And I sort of just respect that. And maybe at some point we'll bump up against that aversion. But yeah, I think it's sort of a process, trial and error and collaboration. And I think, first and foremost, it's really just validating their experience throughout it all.
Mm-hmm. So do you take a pretty significantly different approach compared to like a traditional intuitive eating client? That I find that a lot of the intuitive eating space is focused on helping people that have that like weight loss diet mentality and trying to get out of that. So for these people that, let's just argue that there's a good number of them that they don't care if they're losing weight, gaining weight, like they're completely weight neutral and they're really just focused on these symptoms. Do you take like a pretty significantly different approach than the normal intuitive eating methodology, or is it similar with just some tweaks? Like what's your approach there?
Yeah. I think there's definitely like components of intuitive eating that I will enrich, because I think, again, like intuitive eating does have a nutrition component. It's not a free for all. That's really important that I, relay to everybody. And I think, even RDs in this space are still sort of not fully understanding of that. But I think, again, like intuitive eating's principles include honoring your hunger. Like we could all honor our hunger to understand, hunger and satiety cues, feel our fullness, rejecting sort of diet mentality. Like these are all useful for, I think, across the board, everybody. But I think, it's about where the volume knob is. So for somebody who is, dealing with sort of anxiety around, like, let's say the almonds, like, it's not about like I'm not going to give my whole like honor your hunger spiel, because like that's not really what we're bringing into the room. Perhaps later, if we're looking at their overall diet and we're noticing some nutritional deficiencies, and they're saying to me, I'm not really hungry, I'm really anxious, then maybe we delve into like, what does hunger look like? How do you know when you're hungry? And that's when I kind of turn the volume up on that. But I think, I am having a different conversation with these clients versus, solely individuals that are coming to me saying, I am trying to lose weight. It's not working. I'm intrigued by intuitive eating. Tell me what's going on with that. So I think, it would be individualized for sure.
Mm-hmm. And do you ever work with clients that have almost developed eating disorders because of things like the histamine intolerance or something that is more of a health problem that comes up, and then they see that food restriction helps in a lot of ways, and then it becomes an eating disorder?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a bit of that, like orthorexia is mostly like kind of how that's manifesting, and a bit of sort of restriction as well. And I think, again, like the biggest thing is the quality of life with these individuals. They can be afraid, like there can be fear of going to a restaurant, calling the restaurant beforehand and getting sort of a rundown of ingredients, being embarrassed to like put your hand up and being like, hey, waiter, can you come here? Versus like talking all the way over across the table if somebody's ordering something. I mean, there's a lot of fear around that, or fear of not having their own snacks. And, a lot of that fear, we want to validate, like, hey, like you probably had a couple situations where you felt wronged, where it didn't work out, or it was really scary. And again, like the mast cell symptoms, like they're scary. Like there's times where I was like, is this the time where it's not going to go so well? Like I want to validate that is, it's not a walk in the park. But I think too, depending on my conversations with someone's physician, we can say, hey, look, like let's have you on like an antihistamine regimen while we're introducing some of these foods and bump up against some of these foods. Like the low histamine diet, I remember when I first sort of was diagnosed and I was researching about that. And there's foods on there that I could totally tolerate, no problem. And there's foods on there that I have a little bit more issues with, and it's not considered like a high histamine food. But it's sort of like every food has some form of histamine in it. Like you can drive yourself crazy with that. And, you know, I think, and also too, there are like I'm wearing blue light glasses right now because, you know, I've experienced that even like the LED light of a computer irritates my eyes, which sets off symptoms for me. So it's not even just, you know, food that's participating. So let's say you just had, you know, an apple and you're not wearing your glasses and then you have a reaction. You're like, oh, it was the apple. Like, you know, I like to bump up against sort of that. You know, what else is going on in your home? Are you hydrated? How did you sleep? Like, how are your stress levels? Like, these are also going to kind of set off flares. So I don't know if I answered your question just there. I think I went off on a tangent.
That's okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of a variety of clients I had worked with in the past that it's always really challenging when you do have those food reactions and there is that fear that gets developed and then it turns into something where they are becoming malnourished and underweight and, you know, on the surface looking like somebody that might have anorexia nervosa, but it's actually that they're just so afraid of the food that they think it's going to cause symptoms. They think I mean, like you said, if you have a really bad reaction, it feels like you're going to die. It's not surprising that food would be really difficult to just, I mean, and it's something that it's like, generally you're going to be doing it 3 times a day. It's not like you can just say, oh, I'm just like not going to do this today. Like with the blue light thing, you could argue, well, I'm going to like not expose myself to any screens today and like take a break from the blue light. But you can't, I mean, I guess you could in theory do a little bit of fasting, but that's not a long-term strategy to just avoid food, right? So I do think, and it can get really, really complicated when someone has those food fears. And then, you know, on top of that, there can be some like food rules that they have, orthorexia, like, oh, this food's not, like, I could tolerate this food, but it's not good for me. Cause that's the other thing is a lot of times I would notice that people with these food sensitivities, they didn't want to always eat stuff that in theory they tolerated, but wasn't quote unquote healthy, right? Like something that's like white rice, like, oh yeah, I could eat that, but that's like not good for me to eat all the time. It's like, well, if you can tolerate it and it's calories.
Yeah. And that's the conversation that I'm having too. Like, look, like this is what we have to work with right now. So we have to be flexible. And the hope is that, you know, and I've experienced with the majority of my clients that have intolerances, not all of them, especially the ones that come in with laundry list ones, like kind of like how I operated. Like today, I don't have all the same ones that I had a year ago. I just don't. So in the intolerance world, I think it's, you know, it's not for it. This doesn't happen with everybody, but there is some movement. You know, we don't have to assume that forever we have our intolerances. It is possible. Obviously, with an allergy, it's a different story.
So I'm going to get a little controversial here, but I'm just curious what you would say. What would you say to a dietitian or nutritionist that is in that intuitive eating, health at every size, anti-diet camp that says food intolerances or food sensitivities aren't real?
I would say that that's quite insensitive and that we need to meet our clients where they're at. And I think we need to be asking the questions, what's the motivation for not eating food? I think we have to really that out. We have to understand, hey, like, are you restricting all day and then having GI issues and cramping? And, you know, that's, you know, you're just associating the food with the cramping, but you're having restriction all day. And maybe if we brought food earlier in the day, could we just try, you know, don't change anything, but bring it early in the day and eat consistently? Like, would you feel comfortable to operate in that sphere? But yeah, I think, you know, there needs to be work. There needs to be crossover between these two worlds of dietitians. And I'm hoping to sort of be a part of that. And I think, you know, again, it's ignorant to say that intolerances, you know, don't exist. They absolutely do. The clients experience them. I'm here to tell you that I for sure have experienced them, and hopefully you believe me. And, you know, the reality is that they can feel just as scary as allergies. So, you know, I think, you know, meeting your clients where you're at, you're going to turn away a lot of people that are like, you're saying that you're not validating their experience. And, I think you should ask your questions and you should get the doctor involved and make sure, they're covering their bases nutrition wise, if there's like food groups that they're cutting out. But I think also too, I experiment a lot with texture with people. So if someone's like, oh, I can't have a carrot raw, what is it to have it warm and mashed? And sometimes like that changes, the game too with intolerances. So I think you have to be open-minded as a dietitian, and you have to be up to date with what's going on, and, check your own biases in the way that, we check our own biases about diet culture and all that. We should check our own biases as, assuming that the client is pulling sort of the rug over our eyes.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it can be so challenging because, as I'm confident that as well, digestive issues and those sensitivity symptoms can come from restriction or can come from orthorexic behaviors where they're just like eating too many vegetables or, like their food is just too skewed in one direction, whether that's like low carb or low fat or whatever. If they're doing any sort of extreme dieting, that can create those symptoms. And then it almost becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy of like, oh, but if I eat this stuff, I don't feel good. It's like, well, the reason that your digestion is messed up is because you're eating like 1,000 calories a day, and like digestive health is not generally, benefited by calorie restriction at that level. So I totally understand it can be a very tricky thing to figure out, like, okay, is this more of a, wanting to diet because of like weight loss or orthorexic type of mindset? Or is it really that this person really does have these symptoms and that's what needs to be focused on? And it's not about that they're just like refusing to eat enough or something like that. And having worked with a lot of people, that kind of like, there is no like black and white line, right? It's not like, oh, you're either a disordered eater or you have these food sensitivities and there's nothing in between. And I think sometimes like finding where that in between is the job of a good practitioner to be able to know, like, when do you need to be talking about eating more on purpose because of, malnutrition versus when do you need to be focused on actually getting to the root of like, why are you experiencing these sensitivities? So I'm very glad to know that you're taking that, gray area approach. And I think it's really a shame that there are so many people that promote intuitive eating or promote the anti-diet kind of message, but then they basically, I feel like the word of 2020 is like gaslight, because I don't want to like overuse. Oh it's the worst. But basically it's like, if you're telling people like, oh, if your doctor didn't diagnose a true allergy, then you don't have an allergy and you don't need to avoid these foods. And I just feel like that's a really harmful message to be sharing. Like, I get the heart behind it. Like, they don't want people just making up like, oh, I'm sensitive to this food because I took this like, Amazon like food sensitivity tests and now I have to avoid all these things. Like, I get why they're coming at it from that angle, but I do think there's a lot of people out there that really do have these reactions to foods. And if you're telling someone that doesn't exist, like, that's very stressful to be told that the experience that you're having isn't happening. So again, not to overuse that word, but it really is like the definition of gaslighting to tell someone like, oh, what you're experiencing isn't real. And, so I think it's great that you are in that like heavy air quotes on the word anti-diet, but just having that like non-body control mindset. Like, we don't have to always be trying to lose weight. We don't have to be trying to manipulate our body appearance or size or whatever, but not everybody's going to be able to just eat freely without any sort of restriction and be okay. So I really love that you have that mindset. And I think you have the opportunity to be a voice of reason in a community that I've heard can get a little polar sometimes about stuff and can get very dogmatic, which is kind of ironic that it would be like dogma in the intuitive eating space. But I know I've heard some stories from clients that I've worked with. So just with the last few minutes, I would love to just talk about stress in general. I know that you were mentioning stress can be a big contributor to some of these symptoms, and even just in general, people with disordered eating history or, wanting to feel in control of something. We're recording this in 2020, so this will be coming out in 2021. Hopefully the future is better. You can tell us if it is. But basically 2020, there's been a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of like lack of control, a lot of stuff that's happening that's like very, just difficult to handle for a lot of people. Have you seen that show up as a lot of issues in people's either health or intuitive eating abilities? And do you have any tips for people about how to manage their stress levels without relapsing into restrictive or avoidant food habits?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes I'm coming into a session as a provider and I'm stressed. So, I mean, what's amazing is we're in this sort of really bizarre situation where we are experiencing the same thing that our clients are experiencing at the same time. And obviously there are nuances for everybody. So of course it's coming up, in session. And I have great supervision too, that I'm able to sort of process my own experience in 2020. But I think, as much as we can with curiosity and compassion, say, you know what, it makes a lot of sense that we're stressed. Like, let's just think about this for a second. We are in a global pandemic. Of course, there's going to be significant amount of stress in our lives. That's okay. Instead of like, man, like it's so frustrating and I'm so annoyed and like I have to do this. Like, what is it to sort of, and I think for me, like maybe comes back to the theater, like a little bit of like the dark humor, like it would make sense that like we're pretty freaking stressed right now. I think, again, like if we can have those sort of moments of sort of even dark humor, joy as part of this, that's sort of ways in which I've worked with my clients and even just personally. And I think, especially for individuals that might have issues sort of with eating, in addition sort of to their struggles in terms of the pandemic, making sure they have a solid team. Like for a lot of my individuals that do have disordered eating or eating disorders, like they got to have a therapist. Like I'm not their therapist. And sometimes the lines get blurry and we talk about sort of things, but I'm always like, you know what, I think that would be a really good topic for you to kind of delve in a little bit deeper with your therapist. And I kind of remind them of my role sort of versus what their therapist does. Maybe they also need a physician on board, depending on sort of what's going on. Most times they need a physician on board. And then a lot of what I do is somatic work. So sometimes if I feel the energy of a session, especially it's kind of funny virtually, like I'll have people kind of like dogs are walking through and partners are walking through and work's calling. And sometimes we just settle. And it's kind of for me too, like what is it to sort of settle at the beginning of a session or even in the middle of a session? And with settling, I'll perhaps invite both of us to put our feet on the ground and take kind of a moment and breathe into a body part. Sometimes I say, hey, why don't you find something in the room that's nice to look at? Sometimes people are like, what? What does that even? I'm like, just, pick anything that like is just enjoyable for you to sort of fall on. And I'll have them breathe into that. And then we'll come back and the session's different. It's different. They're more open. They're more available. And I think in these charged, stressful situations, again, oftentimes it's a monkey mind and the mind's going. And, stress and anxiety is often sort of thinking about the past or thinking about the future. Very rarely are we present in the moment. So that's sort of why I invite, look at something and spend time with it, because it's really hard for your brain to sort of do that kind of frontal cortex thing and the amygdala thing at the same time. So to spend time with something in real time, can you taste? Can you see? Can you smell? I invite a lot of my clients to use like rollerblade essential oil in those moments where they're feeling charged. And the act of, actually, I invite them to put it, believe it or not, on the bottom of their feet, because the bottom of the feet actually has like really thin on the bottom of the feet and it absorbs the oil a little bit quicker. And placebo or not, right? It's like a nice sort of self-care experience. Like when's the last time that we spent kind of any time at the bottoms of our feet? And it gives you something to do in those moments. So having an execution versus like, it'll be better, it'll be fine, just hang in. Like that's not useful to somebody if they're feeling quite anxious. So giving them an execution, a to-do that invokes the senses, I find is really useful in terms of stress. And oftentimes if it's in the middle of the session and we're doing that, like what comes up afterwards is really meaningful and they're just more open and available. Or sometimes I'll even call out, like, I'm noticing that like you're hunched over. I'm the queen of this too. I'm like sitting like all awkward all day in my chair. Can you say that again? But can you say that with your legs crossed and sort of your arms open? And that's a little bit, I think, too, of like the drama therapy in me. Like there's a component where I'm kind of pulling from the theater days that your body sort of gives so much meaning. When I was studying acting, we talked about sort of characters and like, where does this character sort of hold their tension? So I think a part of me pops back to that for this, but it's really interesting to sort of experience the difference in somebody saying something with their arms open versus their arms crossed. Like even now I'm crossing my arms. You can't see this, listeners, but I'm crossing my arms and I'm a little like, it gets me a little something meh. There's something a little meh about it. And then I'm opening it and I'm sort of smiling and I feel better already. So I think, again, knowing that sort of stress and trauma lives in the body and calling upon that to sort of be more open.
That's really interesting. And I feel like the way that you do things in your body can make a difference. Like I'm assuming that this could be coming up with the work that you do with even just like sitting down to a meal. And how are you sitting? Like, are you like hunched over your bowl, or are you like sitting kind of relaxed? Like all of that stuff, I feel like a lot of times we miss because it's not talked about a lot. But I think that could definitely make a huge difference in how somebody's body physically reacts to the food that they're eating. And then with the being in the moment piece, I feel like that's something that this year has been really challenging for a lot of people. Like I'll put my hand up as far as just like constantly thinking about what's going to happen. Like, is this going to be over soon? Like just having that like very future oriented thinking. And that's something I'm like prone to it regardless. Like I've always kind of had this, like, what's happening next? What are we doing? Like all that future thinking. But this year it's been more like, is this over yet? Like, when is this going to be done? Like, what's going to happen in the next month? What's going to happen in the next 6 months? That kind of thing. So I feel like when you're constantly thinking about what's going to happen and you're not able to really be present in the moment, I think that's something that can create so much stress all the time. Like I think if you're really in the moment, it's a lot harder to be stressed unless something's acutely stressful happening at the moment. So I think for most of us, we're experiencing that like anticipatory stress all the time right now. And so being able to have that like tangible in your body kind of like moment where you're really like paying attention to what your body's doing or how it feels, or I like literally have this like roller ball of essential oil right here. I'm like, yeah, it's console. Yeah. So it's and I'll like rub this on myself, like if I need to like relax before some kind of like call or something. But even just like the smell, again, like you said, whether it's placebo effect or what, like I don't even.
Who cares? If it makes me feel good, great.
Right. Yeah. So just being able to kind of come back to the moment in your body, I think can be really, really valuable. And it's cool that you have that experience to kind of remind you of, oh, remember when we were doing acting, and if I wanted to like express an emotion more effectively, I would like get into a certain like body stance or something. So I definitely think it affects our bodies and our brains and the way that everything's working pretty substantially. So that's really cool. Any other last tips or anything for people that are dealing with stress around food or those food intolerance symptoms and kind of trying to navigate that world of wanting to be able to eat intuitively, but also being rightfully concerned that their body's going to have a reaction to the food that they're eating?
Yeah, I think as much as you can, like, I sometimes do this with my clients, like, can we have a pump up playlist? I think also the power of music is so fabulous. So can we have the like pump up ready for the food challenge playlist? Maybe they listen to it before a session with me, or they listen to it during the session with me, or I'm playing music. I do that all the time in sessions. Or, of course, on the other end, do you have sort of your chill, I just kind of need like Zen vibe playlist to sort of like kind of get me ready and sort of quiet confidence. So I would say, play around with music as it relates to your relationship to food.
That's awesome. So Rachel, it's been so awesome to talk to you about this. I feel like this is such an interesting conversation that I don't get to have with a lot of other dietitians. So I really appreciate you being willing to come on and share your expertise with our audience. I'm sure there's going to be people that are very interested in learning more about the work that you do and possibly wanting to work with you as a client. So where can those people go to find out about the stuff that you teach on social media or your blog, whatever you have for them? Where should they go check you out?
Yeah, you can check me out on social media at Naar Nutrition. I think I'm so funny. My last name, Naar, N-A-A-R, Nutrition. And then my website, rachelnaarnutrition.com. And feel free to reach out, please.
Awesome. Well, what we'll do is we'll put those links in the notes for everybody if they want to connect with Rachel, make sure that we have everything spelled correctly so that you can access it. And then, Rachel, one last question that I like to ask my guests just for fun. There's no right or wrong answer, but that question is, what do you believe makes somebody more than a body?
Wow. My first thought is the soul that we all have. Like, I think reminding ourselves that there's this inner terrarium, so to speak, that kind of encompasses who we are as individuals. And, you know, no matter how you're showing up physically, no one can take that away from you. That's going to be sort of like your inner ethos. And I think, again, you know, nourishing that with music, with laughter, with social experiences, with a good book, with, you know, our favorite doTERRA oils is, you know, something that's untouchable. And I think oftentimes, you know, untapped.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thank you again, Rachel. It's really great to get to chat with you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for spending the last 45 minutes or so with us on the Fed and Fearless podcast. We'll look forward to seeing you here next week. Take care, everybody. Are you a dietitian or nutritionist business owner that wants to create an online business that attracts, converts, and serves your dream clients? Then keep listening, because I have a special opportunity that will help you create the profitable, joy-filled nutrition business that you always wanted. In my signature group coaching program, the Nutrition Business Accelerator, you'll learn how to start, grow, and scale your online nutrition business to 6 figures and beyond, so you can experience the financial and time freedom that you desire. Inside the program, you'll learn how to attract high-paying clients who are excited to work with you and willing to pay you the rates you deserve. You'll get training on how to effectively sell your services in a way that feels authentic and converts prospects into paying clients without feeling pushy or salesy. And you'll get step-by-step instructions on how to create programs and services that provide transformative results, leading to glowing testimonials and referrals from your current clients, so you can have the greater impact that you desire in the world around you. Inside the program, you'll get mentorship and guidance from me, a compassionate coach who's built her own multi-6-figure online nutrition business. So that way you never have to feel stuck in your business again. I created this program to help struggling dietitian and nutrition entrepreneurs get clarity on who they serve, how they serve them, and how they can stand out in a crowded market so they can more easily attract dream high-paying clients into their online nutrition business. If this sounds like something you're interested in, go to lauraschoenfeldrd.com/NBA to learn more about the program and get on the wait list. That's lauraschoenfeldrd.com/NBA, which is short for Nutrition Business Accelerator. Doors are opening soon, and you don't want to miss out on this one-of-a-kind business coaching opportunity. Let's accelerate your nutrition business together. I'll see you in the program.